There's a lot to to pick up on. First of all, just so everyone, just to set the stage, at Citi, I run a business that's focused, it sits within the investment bank, and it's focused on leveraging sustainability for financial value creation. And we operate, as you can imagine, at a very, at the far end of the spectrum, at the macro level. We do a lot. We have a social finance team, and we do a lot to connect to those smallholders or local communities on the ground. But we really operate at that big macro level. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what's happening at the global, international, macro level, which is very exciting. I think it's very positive and has the potential to really mobilize literally trillions in capital. And then I'll maybe move to the challenges of connecting that to the ground, which is where, where it needs to go ultimately. Just to, I guess, my current experience is that we're seeing a lot of excitement around nature-based solutions. As Fiona mentioned, there's a wholesale transition happening in the financial system, starting with climate, but this is quickly becoming, going into nature. And that is through a few different initiatives. There's the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which Fiona mentioned. There's another initiative that is really starting to change corporate behavior, and I can give you some examples, but it's the Science-Based Targets for Nature, where we're starting to see corporates. It's almost parallel to what we saw at the beginning of the net zero movement. So if you go back, rewind 5 years ago, maybe even a little further, but certainly 5 years ago, we had not yet reached the tipping point of net zero commitments by corporates or governments even. And that did hit a tipping point, I would say, right before Glasgow, the Conference of Parties in Glasgow. And now you really can't raise capital in the capital markets as a listed company or even a private company without showing that you have a commitment to net zero, certainly in the advanced economies, but even in the emerging markets. So South Africa, for example, has a commitment to achieve net zero emissions. So does Saudi Arabia. So it's really, when you have petroeconomies making that commitment, you've hit a tipping point. We're seeing the same thing in nature. We're nowhere near a tipping point yet, but we are starting to see corporates make these commitments, and they're trying to figure out what does it mean to be nature positive. And so I'll give you a concrete example. We're raising capital, 300 million euros for a fund that will invest in restoration. And it's a mixed fund. There's a 75% allocation to European restoration, and there's a 25% allocation to emerging market restoration. And it's all the cash flows are driven by voluntary carbon markets. So we're doing a lot of, we're fundraising for the fund. It hasn't launched yet. And the likely partners, the limited partners of the fund who will invest the equity, are likely to be corporates who have these net zero commitments. So we've been really canvassing hundreds of corporates around the world. And it's so interesting. We've started to hit some of them, and they're saying, you know what? This is fantastic. We don't really care about the carbon. We're much more interested in the biodiversity. And that's because we have this commitment under the Science-Based Targets for Nature, where we've committed to be nature positive, but we don't really know how to achieve that. So bring us projects that both have carbon offsets, but also have biodiversity metrics and positive impacts in our supply shed. So they're looking at specific, supply shed impacts. So that's just one example, and I won't say that most corporates are still very focused on carbon, but we are starting to see the pioneers in the nature space